Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. I am Thanos 016. Marvel. I am Thanos. Chapter 016. Gutn walked towards Scott and said, Mr. Ant-Man, the reason why I want to join your rescue plan is not to cause you chaos in the past, but to help you. In fact, I am not an ordinary human, I am a mutant. Quote. Mutants. Is it a human like Daisy Johnson? Scott was a little surprised. His future son-in-law is not an ordinary person. Almost. There are superpowers anyway. Gutn didn't want to explain the difference to Scott. So what are your superpowers? Scott was curious. Gutn smiled slightly, and immediately changed into Kathy's appearance. Kathy, oh, my God. Scott was so shocked that he quickly got up from his chair. He just came out of Kathy's house, watched her fall asleep, and knew that Kathy could not come out. That is, this Kathy in front of him was fake, but no matter how Scott looked at it, he couldn't see where it was fake. Seeing Scott's stunned look, Gutn changed again and became Scott's appearance. When Scott saw himself, he laughed and exclaimed, God, you're so good. It turns out that you can become anyone. Quote. Gutn changed back to his own appearance and said, Yes, I also have a little research on the quantum field. I know that your plan is to go back in time, and then get these 6 gems, snap your fingers to resurrect half of the disappeared people. When collecting gems, there will definitely be many obstacles. I think my transformation ability will be very useful to you. Quote. Scott thought about it. If he wanted to take a gem from Hydra, then Gutn only needed to transform into the head of Hydra, and he didn't need to fight at all. He could easily trick the gem. This is simply a divine skill, and this ability, no one in the current members of the Avengers has it. Scott said, Okay, you will go to the Avengers mansion with me, but my daughter loves you so much that she will be very reluctant to know that you are leaving too. Quote. Frankly speaking, getting along with Kathy day and night these days, Gutn also liked Kathy, and was reluctant to part with her, so he said, Call Kathy too, let's go to New York together. I estimate that it will take a while to gather people and build the crossing machine. During this time, we can first place Kathy in a safe place, and when we start planning, just don't let her participate. Quote. The reason why Gutn called Kathy was on the one hand, he wanted to be close to Kathy when he was fine, and on the other hand, he wanted Kathy to know some people. Hawkeye's daughter and Iron Man's daughter may inherit the mantle to become the second-generation Hawkeye and the second-generation Iron Man in the future, and they are also members of the Young Avengers. Kathy will also become a changewoman in the future, joining the Teenage Avengers. Scott Lang was also satisfied with this proposal. So, early the next morning, the three happily left San Francisco for NY. Avengers Mansion. Why is it alone drinking? American team Steve Rogers suddenly appeared behind Natasha. 5 years later, Steve Rogers had shaved off his beard and still looked so young, like a lad in his 20s. Natasha, as a remodeled agent of the Red House, was also very old. She held the wine glass and glanced at Steve with a smile. What else can I do without drinking? I feel that my current life is boring, with no goals and no direction. Quote. Steve Rogers folded his hands over his chest and sighed. I'm like you, if only I could do something about the regrets of the past. Quote. Just when the two were downcast, the two suddenly saw 2 men appear in the surveillance video, a white man and a yellow man. These 2 people are none other than Ant-Man Scott Lang and Gutn, who are standing outside the Avengers building at this time. Scott kept waving at the camera and then exclaimed, Hey, I'm Ant-Man. We met at the airport. I'm the big guy. Quote. Because of the Battle of Wakanda, Ant-Man was not involved, and Natasha and Steve were unfamiliar with Scott's face, but they were impressed when it came to Ant-Man. Back then, when the Avengers were in a civil war, because of the Sokovia Agreement, Iron Man and Team America were divided into 2 factions, and each side found helpers, and Ant-Man was found by Sam and belonged to Team America's helper. Team America then remembered who Scott was, because when Scott first met him, he was completely like a fan, and Team America was not impressed by his face. Soon, Steve put Ant-Man and Gutn in. Coming to the Avengers mansion again, Gutn's mood was a little complicated, especially when he saw Black Widow Natasha. He couldn't help but recall the night when he was just resurrected, and the various scenes of the two fighting on the floor. Steve, we're meeting again. Hello, Natasha. Scott greeted the two very politely. Hello, Scott, it's nice to see you. Steve Rogers thought Scott had turned to ashes too. At this time, Natasha suddenly looked Gutn up and down and asked, "Who is this young boy?" Quote. Marvel. I am Thanos 017. Marvel. I am Thanos. Chapter 017. Ant-Man is a member of the Avengers, and it is not surprising that they came to Natasha, but Gutn, the Asian face, has never seen before. And I don't know why. Natasha saw Gutn. She felt very strange, there was a feeling of déjà vu, but judging from her amazing memory ability, she was sure that it was the first time she saw this person. Scott introduced with a smile. Oh, his name is Gutn, and he is the boyfriend of my daughter Kathy. Quote. Steve and Natasha both frowned. What did Ant-Man pull his future son-in-law for? The Avengers Mansion is not a place where anyone can enter. Natasha beckoned the two to sit down and asked, Scott, where have you been in the last 5 years? We sent someone to look for you, but we couldn't find it, and we thought you also disappeared because of Thanos snapping fingers. Quote. In the Avengers 4 Inches movie, Scott came to the Avengers building and ate a few sandwiches, and now, again, before talking about important things, he ate a few bites, and then said, I entered the quantum realm, stayed there for 5 hours, and came out 5 years later. There is no timeline in the quantum field. The entry and exit points of the quantum field correspond to different times. In the quantum field, time is not a line, the dimension of time is expanded. Quote. Steve and Natasha were silent and looked at each other, apparently not understanding. Team America said, can you say it simply? Quote. Let me do it. Gutn saw that Scott really loved to eat that sandwich, and it was a little difficult to speak, so he stood up and explained for Scott. To put it bluntly, we want to travel through time through the quantum field, and we have to make a device that can make ourselves in the quantum field reach a certain point in time in the past at will. Quote. After listening to Gutn's explanation, Steve asked Scott, do you mean to make a time machine to travel back in time? Quote. It's not. Scott said the same answer as the movie, Avengers 4, and then said, it's a time machine. Quote. Gutn remembered that when he was watching a movie, when Scott said this, it caused laughter from the audience in the cinema, and Ant-Man wanted to say no, but he couldn't explain it, he could only say yes. Natasha asked, who can build this device you are talking about? Quote. Scott and Gutn said in unison, Tony Stark. Quote. Stark is definitely the core character in Avengers 4, without him, Ant-Man's Pym particle alone cannot travel through time and space. Natasha looked excited. After 5 years of decadence, she finally regained a trace of vitality, and she quickly said, I immediately held a holographic projection meeting and called everyone over. Quote. So, Gutn saw a very powerful technology, and in front of their eyes, several virtual figures appeared. They were Captain Marvel, Little Raccoon, War Machine and Nebula. This video chat is awesome. Gutn was secretly surprised. He glanced at Captain Marvel with short hair, thinking that she was in outer space. She could make video calls with Natasha on Earth. This Wi-Fi signal is really good. Natasha said to several people, guys, I have learned the good news. We can travel through time and space through the quantum realm, go back in time to collect gems, and then resurrect the disappeared half. When can you come to the Avengers Mansion? I need you. Quote. Captain Marvel said, you guys are messing around, but if there is hope, I approve of you giving it a try, but I'm sorry, I can't go to Earth now, many planets need my protection. Quote. The Little Raccoon said, Captain Marvel, since you have this ugly short hair, your arrogance has also become arrogant. Isn't your hair really cut by others? Quote. Captain Marvel gave the Little Raccoon a blank look and ignored him. Nebula said, I'll drive the spaceship to you soon. Quote. Colonel Road, the War Machine, gave a surprising answer. Sorry, friends, I will not participate in this operation and will not participate in the future. Quote. At this time, Gutn, who was standing on the side, smiled slightly. He knew that at this moment, the Lorelei Banshee he arranged was next to Colonel Road. Team America and Natasha were naturally shocked. Rod, what do you mean by this? Quote. Colonel Rhodes said, I quit it, I'm sorry, I don't want to experience failure again. I have a woman I like now, I can't lose her, please respect my decision. In addition, I decided to hand over my suit of armor and send it to the Avengers Mansion soon. Quote. Several people lowered their heads, only the Little Raccoon mercilessly mocked. Rod, you are too intimidating, why didn't I see that you were so unplanted before? Don't you dare to fight if you have a wife. Quote. Enough. Steve suddenly spoke. Anyone has the right to leave, Rod, and I respect your decision. Quote. Steve didn't force Rod to join. After all, it was a very dangerous thing. At the end of the video call, Steve said, "We have to go to Tony, Thor, Hulk and Barton immediately, plus the three of us and Nebula and Little Raccoon. There are a total of 9 people participating in this space-time hijacking plan." Quote. No, it's 10. Gutn, who was standing on the side, suddenly spoke. Marvel. I am Thanos 018. Marvel. I am Thanos. Chapter 018. Steve Rogers and Natasha looked at Gutn in surprise. Could it be that this little Asian boy also wanted to participate in this great resurrection project? At this time, Scott Lang smiled and said, "I forgot to tell you that he is a mutant and can change his appearance at will to become the appearance of any person." Quote. As soon as Scott's words fell, Gutn immediately turned himself into the appearance of Hawkeye, Barton. He knew that Barton was now killing in the island country, and Natasha was also very worried about him. Sure enough, Natasha saw Gutn's change, Hawkeye Barton, and covered her mouth in shock, and the corners of her eyes were slightly moist, completely treating Gutn as a real Hawkeye. Steve also smiled and nodded. Gutn, your ability is very helpful to us, but I must remind you that this plan is very dangerous and we cannot guarantee your safety. Quote. Gutn changed back to his own appearance and said, "I have nothing to lose, and if I can't resurrect my family, then it's not interesting for me to live." Quote. Gutn disguised himself as an ordinary person who was persecuted by Thanos' snapping fingers and won Steve's trust. Then let's start gathering the Avengers. What do you think? Who to go to first? Steve asked. Gutn, who had successfully blended into the Avengers team, expressed his opinion at this time. Barton will let Natasha go to find it. They have a good relationship. Natasha will definitely be able to convince him. We will go to Dr. Banner, and then let Banner go to Thor, because Thor has persuaded him, and now only he can persuade Thor. After that, we will go to Tony Stark. Quote. Steve Rogers was a little impressed by Gutn, but he didn't expect that this young man, not only with outstanding ability, but also with leadership skills, was very correct about the division of labor this time. It seems that you know a lot about our Avengers, even about Hulk and Thor in Sokka Star. Steve smiled and patted Gutn's shoulder. Gutn shrugged. Your story has long been written as a biography, and you can search it on Google. Quote. Steve smiled and said, "Okay, then according to what Gutn said, Natasha, you go to Barton, we will go and find Hulk now." Quote. When he found Hulk, he was eating at an outdoor restaurant, and because he had long been famous, during the meal, many little girls ran over to find Hulk to take a photo and sign autographs, and Hulk was very happy to accept. The reason why he is so kind is because now he is Dr. Banner's consciousness, Hulk's body. After Infinity War, Banner and Hulk had a serious exchange. Banner gave Hulk enough respect, and then made the strongest brain and the strongest force into one. Hulk is a key figure in Avengers 4 inches who wears the Infinity Gauntlet and then resurrects half of the people in the universe, and Gutn needs to have a good relationship with him. At this time, Gutn suddenly asked the system, "You are a person who loves flowers and blossom systems, is it effective for men? Or can you only get points if you like it?" Quote. System. This system does not distinguish between men and women. As long as the other party likes the host and has enough affection for the host, you can get points. Quote. Gutn nodded. Let women like themselves. You can use seduction, men's words. It is a little more difficult, and these are superheroes. Let them have enough good feelings for a man, unless they do something big, or help them fulfill some wishes. But whether it is a man or a woman, Gutn will get along with these Avengers next, and he wants to brush enough good feelings and points on these Avengers, and then restore his Thanos strength to 100%. After convincing the Hulk went to New Asgard, Oklahoma, Earth, to find Thor, while Gutn, Scott, and Steve went to Tony Scott's house. Morgan, do you love me more, or do you love Mom more? Outside a mansion near the sea, Tony Stark is holding a 4-year-old girl and sitting on the lawn playing with her. The little girl is sweet and cute, and she has a fight with Ant-Man's daughter Kathy when she was a child. And next to the father and daughter, there stood a tall woman. It was Tony Stark's wife, Pepper Pepper Popes, Pepper's figure has always been very good, it is rare that the figure can also recover so well after giving birth. Little Pepper looked at her husband and daughter and smiled happily. I am Morgan's mother, of course she loves me a little more. Quote. Tony Stark was very unconvinced. I'm still Morgan's father, and in the past few years, I have not left you and have not gone anywhere. Quote. Pepper suddenly remembered the things that Iron Man did 5 years ago that almost killed him. Perhaps, Tony Stark is safe now, but is he happy? As Pepper's wife, she knows that Tony Stark is not entirely happy, and he still feels guilty and still misses those who have died. At this time, an Audi car slowly drove by. Tony Stark looked in surprise, and a group of old friends walked out of the car. Marvel. I am Thanos 019. Marvel. I am Thanos. Chapter 019. Seeing Steve Rogers appear, Tony Stark was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Steve to come to him at all, because the two had been at odds since the Sokovia Agreement. 5 years ago, after Captain Marvel returned to Earth with Stark's spaceship, the weak Stark had a big fight with Steve, and he blamed Team America, saying that they should have prevented this from happening a long time ago, and that Team America didn't let him do it. Stark discovers that in addition to Steve Rogers, he is accompanied by Scott, Ant-Man, and a strange man he has never met, knowing that Steve has nothing to do with the 3 treasures and may have something important to find him today. And Pepper was very happy to see Steve, took the initiative to hold her daughter's hand, and walked over to say hello. Steve, welcome to come. Quote. Hi, Pepper. Steve smiled and greeted Pepper, and then bent down to greet her and Stark's daughter. Morgan has never seen his father have any friends, and when he sees the 3 of Gudeian, he greets them very happily, and the atmosphere of the meeting is finally not so embarrassing. Seeing Morgan Stark, Gutn couldn't help but think of watching the premiere of Avengers 4, the little girl and Stark said, "Love you 3,000 times," which was really tearful. This time, reborn in the Marvel world, Gutn also wants to change the plot of Avengers 4. He will not let Stark wear gloves and snap his fingers, because when he snaps his fingers, he decides life and death according to people's wishes, and when Stark snaps his fingers, he must want Thanos to disappear, and then Gutn will turn grey. On the other hand, Stark will also die as a result. If Gutn can stop Stark, he will not only save himself, but also save Stark's life, so that he can continue to accompany his daughter. After playing with Morgan for a while, Pepper took her daughter away with interest, and she knew that the 3 of the American team came to find Stark, and there was something very important. In one of the courtyards, several people sat down, and Tony Stark was also very direct, and asked, "Say, Steve, what is the matter with me?" Quote. Steve said, "Tony, we can get back those who have lost and we need your help." Quote. With that, Steve looked at Scott and motioned for Scott to explain the details. Scott said a little nervously, "Hank Pym and your father used to be partners, you should also know the quantum realm, then I won't explain much. Our plan is to use the quantum realm technology to research a device that travels to the past, and then travel to the time when Thanos didn't collect 6 gems, take these 6 gems back, collect 6 gems, and make an infinity glove, and then snap your fingers to resurrect the disappeared half of the universe." Quote. Scott was very excited to say, and Stark was also very excited to hear it, this idea is indeed too exaggerated. As the smartest man on Earth, Stark frowned and said, "Using the past to change the present, that is, we are going to travel collectively and then split up to grab gems that belong to the past timeline." Quote. Yes, Steve Rogers said positively. Nope, Stark immediately vetoed, "If we fail, everyone will be in ashes, and even if we succeed, it may change the current reality. I want to keep my daughter was obtained after Thanos snapped his fingers, I must not lose her." Quote. Tony, Steve tried to persuade Stark. "Needless to say, I have to keep what Thanos earned in the past 5 years after snapping his fingers, and so do everyone else." Tony Stark was very determined. At this time, Gutn suddenly spoke, "Mr. Stark may have thought of our plan as the plot of Back to the Future." Quote. "Isn't it Back to the Future? BTW, which one are you?" Tony Stark, a proud man, has only now looked at Gutn. Gutn smiled and said, "Of course not, this does sound a bit similar to Back to the Future, because there is only one universe at the beginning, but every time you wear quantum space and change an event, a new universe will be created, but unlike Back to the Future, even if the ABCD universe is created, it is still our main universe when worn back. If you don't believe me, you can ask Friday. Besides, my name is Gutn, and I am a mutant. Quote. Tony Stark obviously didn't want to believe Gutn. He didn't want to talk to this young man who had never obtained a doctorate or master's degree, but asked Steve, do you just listen to this kid's side? Quote. Steve was blunt. If there is a glimmer of hope, we should all try. Quote. Stark sighed and said, let's not talk about this again. If you stay for lunch, I still welcome it, but don't mention it again. Quote. Steve and Scott's faces were slightly disappointed. This scene, Gutn also saw in Avengers 4, Stark pretended not to agree, but in fact he would study the feasibility of this matter behind his back. Let's go. Steve put on his sunglasses and prepared to leave. You guys go first, I want to stay. Gutn suddenly stopped. Scott was worried. Tony doesn't seem to like you very much, I advise you to go with us, so as not to be bored. Quote. Gutn smiled confidently, are you worried that he will drive me out? Rest assured, I have a way for him to have to accept me. Quote. Marvel. I am Thanos 020. Marvel. I am Thanos. Chapter 020. Tony Stark is a bit unkind. If he does not welcome you, he will definitely not be polite to you. Even if you are a friend of the American team, he will ruthlessly give you an eviction order. Scott didn't understand what Gutn could do to get Stark to agree to him staying here. At this time, Pepper saw that everyone was leaving, and took the initiative to bring her little daughter Morgan out to see it off. Stark also walked out, seeing that Gutn's position was a little far away from Steve and Scott. It seemed that he didn't want to go, and quickly said to Gutn, dude, don't blame me for being direct, if you want to stay here alone to eat, I won't invite you. Quote. Gutn glanced at Stark. This rich boy brother was too much, and he was not even willing to invite a meal, but Gutn did not intend to ask for his opinion. I saw that Gutn suddenly turned into a 3-year-old white boy, shorter than Morgan, cute baby-faced, walking swayingly, and then ran to Stark's daughter with little feet, held Morgan's hand, and asked milkily, Miss Morgan, can I play with you? Quote. Seeing this scene, everyone almost fainted. Nima, this is also too caught off guard. Gutn actually thought of using this trick to stay in Stark's house. Stark is now also a daughter slave. If Gutn is his daughter's friend, he has no way to evict Gutn. Steve Rogers also burst out laughing and said to Scott, I finally know why he can track down your daughter, this guy is really funny. Quote. Subsequently, Steve Rogers nodded to Gutn, who became a 3-year-old boy, thanked him, and then convinced Iron Man that the matter would be entrusted to Gutn. At this moment, Steve Rogers began to be glad that there were shapeshifters like Gutn in the team, and he also had some good feelings for him. Soon, Steve and Scott drove away, leaving Gutn here. After Gutn became a little boy, he took Morgan's hand and went out to play. A 4-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy, it is simply a perfect match, and it is easier to communicate. In Morgan's opinion, it is more intimate. Target Morgan Stark detected. Identity. Young Avenger. Character level. C. If the host gets Morgan's like, he will get 1,000 points. Hearing the sudden prompt of the system, Gutn couldn't help but be a little surprised. A 4-year-old little girl actually had a point reward. 1,000 points is not much, but mosquito meat is also meat. Well, don't blame me for starting with a 4-year-old girl. Gutn also fawned more enthusiastically with this little girl, and I have to say that it was too simple to please a 4-year-old girl. Gutn asked, Morgan, why are you called Morgan? Quote. Morgan laughed out a cute little dimple. Guess what's the story? Quote. Gutn, is it the name that your parents dreamed of when they dreamed? Quote. Morgan clapped his little hands in surprise. Wow, you're so good, you actually guessed it. Morgan is the name of my mother's distant uncle. Quote. System. Congratulations to the host for getting Morgan's like, reward 1,000 points. Do you want to redeem the item now? Quote. Gutn now only wants to fully restore his Thanos strength, and Zuling Qingdan also needs at least 3,000 points, so he did not redeem it. Soon, the time came to 10 o'clock at night, and Gutn and Morgan had been inseparable since the afternoon. playing together until bedtime. Morgan took Gutn's hand and brought Gutn to her bed. Gutn, you sleep with me today, we can sleep on a pillow. Morgan said with a grin. Okay. Gutn also accepted it gladly. But at this time, Tony Stark suddenly walked into the room, hugged Gutn, and said, Morgan, he can't sleep with you, he and Dad still have very important things to do. Quote. Morgan was a little unhappy, and Stark hurriedly said, well, sleep, love you 1,000 times. Quote. With that, Stark kissed Morgan's forehead. Morgan lay on the bed, looked at his father, and gradually smiled on his face, I have loved you 3,000 times. Quote. Stark's face smiled into a flower. Gutn also recalled seeing this scene in the cinema. This sentence must be the most popular sentence in Avengers 4. Gutn has guessed that in various videos on Douyin or Weibo, crazy to use this sentence to earn people's tears. Stark took Gutn out, not knowing how Stark would feel if he knew that the person he was holding was Thanos. Stark put Gutn on the ground. Enough, change back to the original form. Quote. Gutn changed back to his original appearance and said with a smile, Tony, I didn't stay to convince you, because I know that even if we don't convince you, you will try it in private, I just want to make friends with you. Quote. Tony Stark gave Gutn a blank look. I see that you came to soak my daughter, she is only 4 years old, if you dare to attack her, you will die. Quote. Later, Stark came to the workbench, turned on the holographic projection, and asked Iron Man's machine system, Friday, help me calculate whether it is possible to go back to the past through quantum realm technology, but even if it changes history, come back or now. Quote. Soon, Friday gave the answer. It's entirely possible, Mr. Stark. Quote. Please like and subscribe.